Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all doing good and well. So I've been seeing some videos recently of people talking about their comfort albums, albums that make them feel good or that they resort to in moments where they feel like they need comforting. And I thought I'd do a version of that sort of video here, but I feel like I have talked about quite a few comfort albums recently. So I thought instead, whilst a lot of these are still comfort type albums, I talk about albums that remind me of a very specific time and place in my life. I may even refer you back to a series I did 2 years ago, maybe even longer than that, where I talked about albums that reminded me of specific points in my life. Well, this is kind of like that, but with multiple albums in one video. So here I'm going to be talking about albums that remind me of a specific time and place in my life. And we're going to start with one, which is, a cracking album. It recently had its 20th anniversary. And that's the third studio album from Killswitch Engage, The End of Heartache. And I've got it here on CD. And it's one song, really. I say it's an album that reminds me of a specific time and place, and the album does, for whatever reason, remind me of that time and place. But it's one song, really, that really reminds me of that time and place, if I'm being entirely truthful. But this album definitely reminds me of when I was 19, and it was this particular night when I went out with some friends at university. One of the best nights, incidentally, I've probably had in living memory. It was an absolutely fantastic night. And I just remember a really good night with beers, with great music. I mean, it was this club, and not everyone is so fortunate. I mean, I was very fortunate to go to a university where you had a rock and metal nightclub in the town. I mean, how many people can say they are able to go to clubs where you get music like that playing? I mean, most of the time you have to put up with the mainstream stuff, right? And that's been the story of most of my life. But at university, I had access to a really fantastic rock and metal nightclub. And it was dingy, it was dirty, you know, the toilets were often flooding or flooded. So that was always a unique experience, trying to negotiate those. But, you know, it was a brilliant place to enjoy rock and metal. So one night in this club, I heard this song come on, and it was Rose of Sharon, and it had these massive speakers against the walls, and just hearing that song blast at full, like really loudly, with Howard's voice roaring through those speakers, I cannot think of too many moments in my life where a song has blown me away so much in just that moment. And because of that night and having a great time with my friends and coming back, and actually I remember coming back to the place I was living at the time with my flatmates of that time, and there'd been an affair, or someone had cheated on someone else rather, I think, and yeah, there was a bit of that too, but you know, I remember that at that point in time, all I could think about was how good a night I'd had, and you know, and I associate this Killswitch Engage album with that particular night, and you know, everything around it. And so whenever I go back, and particularly Rose of Sharon, but probably a lot of the rest of the album as well, it does remind me of that night out at university. Now, next up I'm going to talk about a Roxy Music compilation, the best of Roxy Music, and this is, you know, when it comes to Roxy Music, I've only really ever heard the hits, largely because I only own this. I've never quite been, I've never quite wanted to explore all of their albums. And perhaps that's the reason why I ended up just getting their hits, because I do love a lot of their hit songs. And this particular compilation reminds me, and I think I was listening to it quite a bit about this time, when I used to go, myself, my parents and my sister, we'd go to the seaside place in Suffolk called Aldborough. You can look it up if you're interested. But I remember sitting, I think, in an outside area, you know, having drinks and maybe some food, and looking out to the sea and the waves rolling in, and it just feeling like a really kind of nice moment, you know, where you feel completely relaxed. And how many of us have moments in our life where we can say we feel just completely at ease and completely relaxed. And I think this was around 2008, probably in the spring of that year, I think, if my memory is right. And Jealous Guy came on the radio, And I've been listening to this album, as it happens, I think the same day, and it was kind of weird, but yeah, Jealous Guy, that cover of the John Lennon song, it came on the radio, and I was like, oh, you know. But I just remember it being such a serene moment. It was so serene. It was just, I was feeling really relaxed, like I say, and just watching the sea and the waves rolling in, and just hearing that song. It was just like perfect. You know, that's the kind of, you know, moments that we love when we get the chance to, you know, listen to great music and be in a really good moment. The next album I'm actually going to talk about is Joe Satriani's The Extremist. Obviously, you know, I've mentioned this is one of my all-time favourite albums before, so I was going to think about avoiding some of these because I talk about them, or have talked about them before, but then I was like, oh, well, but this is an album that very specifically reminds me of a very specific day in my life, and that day was my 18th birthday. And my brother-in-law, he bought me this, and it's one of the best presents I've ever had. I think this is my favourite Satriani album as well. Absolutely fantastic guitar solos on here, and some of his more his really bright sound on this album. I think the production by Andy Johns and the mix is brilliant. You know, really clear, really wholesome sound to this album. And I think some of these other albums, you don't have that same power and rock feel to them necessarily, but on this album you get the full rock sound with Matt and Greg Bissonette as well on the bass and drums. It's a brilliant album, very specifically just reminds me of my 18th birthday and getting that. Next up, we're going to talk about Nirvana's Incesticide. And this album, again, we're going back to my teenage years. I think apart from one album, we keep going back to my teenage years. Don't know what that says, but that reminds me very specifically of a train trip with my friend and his dad to go to Manchester, and we were going to see a wrestling event. I think it was, you know, I think it was maybe called WWF back then, and it was a rebellion event or something. And this was the soundtrack to that train journey, and it always reminds me of that now. It always reminds me of going up to Manchester to that wrestling event. This is a good album, actually. I think. I mean, I prefer Bleach, but there's some really good stuff on this album. I think Dive's a good opening track. Molly's Lips, I think I like that one. Polly, good song. Beeswax, some good stuff on there. And that Nirvana album, Incesticide. Now, next up, again, an album which I have spoken about, and at some length, on 5 or 6 different occasions, but it's definitely an album that very specifically reminds me of a time and place in my life, and that time and place was right before the 2020 first COVID lockdown. About that time, I went onto YouTube. I was feeling a bit down because I was like, how long is this all going to go on for? How long are we going to have to live through these restrictions? You know, what impact is going to have on my life? I was really in a good place at that time, before that time, feeling a lot of momentum in my life, actually, feeling like things were really changing in the right direction for me, and things like having just a good feeling about the time. And then suddenly that happened, and it got me down. I was really gutted that suddenly, all these restrictions were going to happen. Of course, same situation for everybody. We'd have to, live our lives locked down in our houses or our flats or wherever it is that we were living at that point. But this album, by Always, Anti-Socialites, it got me through those early weeks and months for sure. And it does now have a eternal special place in my heart for helping to do that at that specific point in time. It was that opening track in Undertow. Again, another one of those songs, when you first listen to them, you just never forget. You just never forget. I heard that song, and similar to the Rose of Sharon, I mean, a totally different song, right? A totally different song from Rose of Sharon, but it had the same sort of impact where you're just like, that song is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I forever associate that album, because I went on to listen to it about that time, with the start of COVID. But what an amazing album to have by your side at that sort of a point in time. It's just a great, you know, beautiful, beautiful dream pop shoegaze kind of an album, that one. We're going to move on to Neil Young and Crazy Horse, Rust Never Sleeps next. So this is kind of more my we're now going into my early 20s with this album, and an old job. And that old job was working in a sort of a pretty dusty old office in somewhere called Clacton-on-Sea, which is on the Essex coastline, right? And I remember listening to this a lot on my MP3 player back then, and I think it's songs like Thrasher and Powderfinger, Hey Hey My, Into the Black, and Hey Hey My Hey Hey Out of the Blue as well, as it happens. And it reminds me of that train journey, and specifically one where I can remember this album coming on, and I was looking out the window, and it was a beautiful sunset. And you know, lots of people don't necessarily think of that area as a beautiful area. Believe me, if you hear the talk of certain towns in Essex, they have a bad reputation. But in this particular part of that train journey, where you see the rolling countryside and the sunset, just a really nice moment. And I do think of that when I'm listening to Rust Never Sleeps by Neil Young and Crazy Horse. So I've got a couple left here. I'm just going to get through these. I've got Thin Lizzy's Black Rose, again, another all-time favourite album. And this reminds me, going to my late 20s with this, I must have been 27 or 28, with my best mate, Rich. Don't know if he ever watches my videos, but anyway, we both went to Ireland that year. And I was getting to know Thin Lizzy a lot of the time, partly because I wanted to get, you know, involved in the Irish culture and get more involved in Lizzy's music. And I think this album I got a few years though before that, but I suddenly wanted to revisit it and really get into Lizzy again. And there are songs on here, particularly I think, you know, likes of Waiting for an Alibi and Black Rose and Do Anything You Want To, those sorts of things. They remind me of the first time that I went to Dublin with my mate, and we hit up a couple of places in Dublin, had a great night. It was actually where he incidentally met his now partner, and just had a really fantastic night, lots of whiskey, you know, cheap place to stay. And again, it was just one of those great nights, and that whole holiday, if you like, it was like a long weekend away in Dublin, and very eventful as it turned out. And this album reminds me of that long weekend in Dublin. And then move on to my last album. And this reminds me, again, although this must have been more, I think it was when, I just have a vague memory with this one. It was when my parents were driving me to universities to check them out. This was before I could drive. Must have been when I was about 17. It was before I could drive. And my parents were driving me around universities, I think to show me ones which I was interested in looking at, you know, because I was potentially going to go there or whatever. And this album by Idlewild, it's called 100 Broken Windows. And I had my CD player then, and I was listening to this a lot on those journeys to those universities. I think the one in particular I'm thinking of, the university that I was checking out, was Chester. But I don't think I didn't end up going to that one. I went to a different university, but it reminds me of that, you know, my parents driving me there. Might have been just my mum, actually. Now, you see, my memory's a bit vague with this one, but it does remind me of that specific time in my life. So thanks very much always for watching. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to drop a like and a sub. I do have to say, once again, that I am going to be posting a video very shortly about my hiatus. Thanks for bearing with me on that. It is, you know, just the situation at the moment where I think I'm going to have to just pause YouTube for a while. Just my focus is entirely on getting my move at least started and up and running, so that I have my priorities just in the right order for the moment. But that's not to say I'm not coming back to YouTube. I will talk a bit more about that in the video I post about my hiatus and the sort of time I think I may be coming back. But as I say, I'll talk about that more in the next video. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching this. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know albums that maybe remind you of specific moments or times in your life. I'd be interested to find those out. Otherwise, from me, until next time, it's bye for now.